Ladies and gentlemen, please rise for the national anthem. Guest of honor, Dr. Ishat Hussain, respected Professor Dr. Azra Yasmeen, distinguished guest speakers, paper presenters, faculty, staff, and my dear students. Assalamu alaikum and good morning. I, Faiza Azhar Khan, on behalf of Department of Economics, welcome you all to the second International Conference on Sustainable Development in Contemporary World, Priorities, Challenges and Prospects, organized by Department of Economics, Fatma Janab Women University, in collaboration with World Bank and South Asia Economic Policy Network. To formally start the inaugural session of the workshop, I would like to invite Sayyida Kainat from Department of Islamic Studies to recite some verses from Holy Quran.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يا أيها المزمل قم الليل إلا قليلا نصفه أو انقص منه قليلا أو زد عليه ورتل القرآن ترتيلا إنا سنلقي عليك قولا ثقيلا إن ناشئة الليل هي أشد وطئا وأقوم قيلا إن لك في النهار سبحا طويلا واذكر اسم ربك وتبتل إليه تبتيلا رب المشرق والمغرب لا إله إلا هو فاتخذه وكيلا صدق अल्लाहुल अज़ीम। तर्जुमा। ए मोहम्मद सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम, जो कपड़े में लिपट रहे हो, रात के वक्त क़याम करो मगर थोड़ी रात, क़याम आधी रात का करो या उससे कुछ कम या कुछ ज़्यादा, और कुरान पाक को ठहर ठहर कर पढ़ा करो। हम अनकरीब तुम पर एक भारी फरमान नाजिल फरमाएंगे। कुछ शक नहीं कि रात का उठना नफ्स को सख्त पामाल करता है और इस वक्त का जिक्र भी खूब दुरुस्त होता है। दिन के वक्त तो तुम्हें और बहुत से शुगल होते हैं, बस अपने रब के नाम का जिक्र करो और हर तरफ से बेताल्लुक़ होकर सिर्फ उसी की तरफ मतवज्जा हो जाओ। वही मशरिक़ और मग़रिब का मालिक है जिसके सिवा कोई माबूद नहीं, तो उसी को अपना कारसाज बनाओ। अब सब मिलकर मेरे साथ एक बार दरूद इब्राहिमी पढ़ लें। अल्लाहुम्मा सल्ली अला मुहम्मदिन व अला आलि मुहम्मदिन कमा सल्लैता अला इब्राहीमा व अला आलि इब्राहीमा इन्नका हमीदुम मजीद। अल्लाहुम्मा बारिक अला मुहम्मदिन व अला आलि मुहम्मदिन कमा बारकता अला इब्राहीमा व अला आलि इब्राहीमा इन्नका हमीदुम मजीद। जज़ाकल्लाह।
Dear audience, I would like to invite Professor Dr. Bushra Yasmeen, the conference coordinator, for the introduction of the conference.
I welcome you all to the second international conference on sustainable development in contemporary world, priorities, challenge and prospect, being organized by the Department of Economics in collaboration with the World Bank and South Asia Economic Policy Network. The quest for sustainable development has gained momentum since the introduction of Sustainable Development Goals in 2015. In the same year, we organized our first international conference on sustainable development issues and challenges in collaboration with Higher Education Commission. Sustainable development policy targets and the policy statements are increasingly coming to the surface as strategic goals both in the national policy statement and international agreement. It is concerned with extending to all the opportunities for a better life through providing security, enhancing capabilities, and ensuring accountability. At the core of sustainable development, there exist three pillars: society, economy, and environment. Understanding the complex connection and interdependence of these pillars requires some effort, and the effort needs to be sustained. The conference theme encapsulates the main goals of Pakistan Vision 2025 as well, ranging from developing human and social capital to achieve sustained, indigenous and inclusive growth. The conference features Fatma Jinnah Memorial Lecture by our worthy guest of honor, Dr. Ishrat Hussain, whose exceptional career and body of work is a testament to his analytical prowess. We are looking forward to his deliberation on the issue. The keynote address will be delivered by Dr. Hafiz Pasha, a veteran economist with his own unique insight into sustainability challenges and prospects. He will discuss the short-run issues of financial sustainability, and I am confident that his address will leave us more informed and more inquisitive. First international keynote address will be delivered by Dr. Len Pritchard, the Director of Prize Program on Sustained versus Sustainable Development, Pakistan at Crossroads, where he will elaborate on the multifaceted nature of pursuit of sustainable development and how compromising on sustained growth has affected the development outcomes for Pakistan. Second international keynote will be delivered by Dr. Asad Islam, Director, Center for Development Economics and Sustainability and Professor of Economics, Monash University, Australia. He will speak on promoting and sustaining learning opportunities for all, remote learning using low-tech solutions. The Chief Economist for the South Asia region, World Bank, Hans Timmer, will grace the ceremony with his address on 5th of October. The John Maynard Keynes Memorial Lecture will be delivered by Professor Dr. Ishfaq Hassan Khan on neoliberalism and a rising debt burden experienced from Pakistan. Dr. Khan is a knowledgeable and charismatic orator, and I, for one, am looking forward to his often unconventional views on the management and running of Pakistan's economy. There are three plenary sessions in the conference: localization of SDGs and a regional perspective, where the renowned economists and policymakers will share their views with reference to sustainable development at regional, national, subnational and societal level. Second plenary session titled Environment, Technology and Institution is reserved for our international speakers from all over the world, showcasing both quantitative and qualitative aspects of sustainable development. This session will highlight the efficacy of quantitative tools in sustaining policy making, energy use and technological transformation, need for aligning economics to the natural world, and role institutions can play in ensuring inclusiveness and sustainability. Third plenary session would be held on the third day on policies facets of sustainable development, where the seasoned researchers and economists in policy wing will share their views on institutional reforms, fiscal and monetary policy, and SDGs in the particular context of Pakistan. A panel discussion on tapping the astounding talent of women in achieving sustainable development goals would be held on 5th of October to gain the perspective on SDGs from the women in leadership role. Technical sessions on the sub-theme of economy, society and environment will be conducted as parallel sessions. First session on economic inquiries and policies in the wake of SDGs. It deals with a diverse variety of economic issues and challenge in the way to sustainable development. Second session on exploration of social vulnerability and resilience focuses on the issues pertaining to social development, subjective well-being, resilience, human rights, food, and health security. Third session on climate change and environmental sustainability will shed light on the critical situation of environmental degradation, climate change, and its implications. Research showcased in technical session not only cover all three pillars of sustainable development but also explore new avenues for carrying out sustainability research and policy analysis. In a nutshell, this conference aimed to evaluate and analyze different aspects of sustained and sustainable development through showcasing independent original research work, deliberation by seasoned scholars, and participation of an active and motivated audience. We hope to generate productive debate and workable solutions in both national and global context for combating the challenge in the way of achieving sustainable development. As an outcome of the conference, we are going to launch SDGs Research and Resource Center with the support of the World Bank and South Asia Economic Policy Network for making the collaborative effort dynamic and sustainable. I hope we live up to your expectations. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Ladies and gentlemen, now it's time for the welcome address of the worthy Vice Chancellor of Fatma Janab Women University, Dr. Saima Hamid.
Dear guests, scholars, presenters, participants, faculty and staff members, and my dear students, welcome to the second International Conference on Sustainable Development in Contemporary World, Priorities, Challenges and Prospects, organized by the Department of Economics in collaboration with World Bank. Sustainable development is indeed a dynamic concept, which means that development that addresses contemporary issues with the perspective of ensuring that future generations can fulfill their needs. The idea of sustainable development was conceived in early 70s when the world realized that in order for life in general and mankind in particular to survive, there is need to conserve and protect the natural capital. The global community today is in its pursuit of the Sustainable Development Goals. As we grapple the global pandemic, the human and economic toll has been unprecedented. The current crisis is threatening the loss of decades of development gains, further delaying crucial transition to greener, more inclusive economies, and throwing progress on SDGs even further off track. There is a need to assess the prevailing state of affairs and devise practical solutions for capitalizing on the prospects, identifying priority areas, and facing the colossal challenges in the way to sustainable development. Universities and institutes of higher learning have a vital role to play in creation of understanding and devising tools for achieving SDGs. We already know that the target is just around the corner. The SDGs agenda has to be achieved by 2030. I'm proud to mention here that FJWU's vision and mission are aligned with the objectives of sustainability through societal empowerment. The university is providing quality education to the women of Pakistan, enabling them to become thorough professionals, skilled researchers, and contributing members of the society. We are continuously establishing closer links nationally and internationally with the industry for conducting research pertaining to SDGs, devising and implementing projects for addressing the issues and campaigning for the cause of achieving sustainable development. The university has established mechanism of tracking SDGs, oriented research and projects carried out in the institute through compiling and publishing report on SDGs. Since 2019, our faculty has published over 350 papers related to different sustainable development goals, and currently over 30 research projects have been sponsored by prestigious institutes which are underway. Every department in the university is offering a wide array of courses pertaining to various aspects of sustainable development within the purview of the subject matter of their respective discipline. At the national level, we still have a long way to go for achieving SDGs. Today's conference on sustainable development in contemporary world, organized by the Department of Economics, is an excellent opportunity to bridge this gap between theory and practice. Theory and practice are indeed two sides of the same coin, and they assist in creation of mutually reinforcing networks and working towards our common goal, that is, achievement of sustainable development. The conference encapsulates three aspects of sustainability, namely economy, society, and environment, through thematic technical sessions. I'm very happy to see the participation of a lot of scholars from across the globe, and through our plenary discussions, lectures, and panel discussions, I hope that we will define the way forward. I wish everyone the best for productive discussions that may add to the scholarly discourse pertaining to the subject and generate ideas for the policymakers and stakeholders in facing the challenges and capitalizing on opportunities in sustainable development. I would particularly like to acknowledge the contribution of World Bank in funding and patronizing the event, and I look forward to continued collaboration with the other partners. I would like to express my thanks to all the participants who are here to share their research on this platform and the dignitaries for gracing the occasion. Good luck to the conference team. May Allah bless you all with success. Ameen.
I now invite Professor Dr. Azra Yasmeen, Acting Vice Chancellor, Fatma Janabime University, for her address.
Assalamu alaikum and good morning. Dear students, faculty members, and our very respectable Dr. Ishrat Hussain, who is the chief guest of the event. I welcome you all in the second International Conference on Sustainable Development in Contemporary World, Priorities, Challenges and Prospects. The current global context of slow economic growth, social inequality and environmental degradation is creating unprecedented challenges for the global community. Indeed, we are facing a change in era. It is no longer viable to continue with the same patterns of production and consumption as before. We need a shift from the prevailing paradigm to one of inclusive long-term sustainable development. Sustainable development has become a proper and popular catchphrase. This is not a buzzword, this is a catchphrase because like everyone is talking about the sustainable development, but many of us have no idea what is sustainable development and what we need to do for this. This catchword in the contemporary development discourse is very important, and decision makers needs to be constantly mindful of the relationships, complementarities and trade-offs. Among these pillars, the three pillars which I've already mentioned for this conference, society, environment and the economy definitely. We need to ensure responsible human behavior and actions at the international, national, community and individual levels in order to uphold and promote the tenets of the paradigm in the interest of the human development. More needs to be done by the key players, particularly the government, private sector and civil society organizations in terms of policies, education and regulations on social, economic and environmental resource managements, is very important to ensure that everyone is sustainable development aware and conscious, cultured, and compliant about this particular catchy, or I must say, the important phrase. Today's conference is a step towards awareness raising, discussion generation, comparative analysis, and presenting the possible solutions to the stakeholders. It is also a good platform for the training of the students who can not only listen to the august presenters but also interact to speak their minds, to set goals for themselves to play their role in achieving the sustainable development targets at every level. I'm especially thankful to the Department of Economics, Dr. Bushra Yasmin and her team, who were working hard for this event to be, to happen. And I'm happy to see the audience. There is a large number, definitely many of the people they are coming in the coming days. This is a 3-day event, and I want that this should be fruitful, this should be a successful event. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am, for your kind presence today. Ladies and gentlemen, today we have the honor to have Professor Dr. Hafiz Pasha as the keynote speaker for the inaugural session of the conference. Dr. Hafiz Pasha is Professor Emeritus at Beacon House National University, former UN Assistant Secretary and Managing Director, Board of Institute for Policy Reforms. He has served as Chairman of the Advisory Panel of Economists to the Planning Commission, Convener of the Economic Advisory Council of the Prime Minister of Pakistan, and Chairman of the Tax Advisory Council of Federal Board of Revenue from 2008 to 11. Earlier, Dr. Pasha was UN Assistant Secretary General and Director of the Regional Bureau for Asia and the Pacific of UNDP for a period of 6 years. He has also served as the Federal Commerce Minister, Federal Minister for Finance and Economic Affairs, and Education Minister in 3 governments. Prior to this, he was the Vice Chancellor at the University of Karachi, Dean and Director of the Institute of Business Administration, Karachi, and Research Professor and Director of the Applied Economics Research Center, Karachi. Dr. Pasha has PhD degree from Stanford University, USA. He was awarded the Congressional Medal of Achievement by the Philippines Congress in 2005. In 2012, he received the Inaugural Lifetime Achievement Award for Excellence in the field of social sciences. He was nominated in 2012 as one of the top 100 educators in the world by International Biographical Center, Cambridge, England. He has published over 150 books and articles in the fields of governance, public finance, urban and regional economics, poverty and social development, industry, and energy economics. Let's all listen to Professor Dr. Hafiz Pasha's take on short-run issues of financial sustainability.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Honorable Vice Chancellor, Dr. Bushra Yasmin, my dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. It is indeed a wonderful opportunity to be here at this second international conference which has been organized by the Fatima Jinnah Women's University, a university which has established a very strong reputation for itself and is noted for its extremely capable faculty and a very, very modern and organized curriculum. Ladies and gentlemen, the issue that is being presented by various speakers and distinguished experts in this conference, which is spread over actually from the 3rd to the 6th of October, is the fundamental issues related to sustainable development in the contemporary world. Ladies and gentlemen, the way I see it, and this is also implicit in the design of the sessions of this conference, that there are essentially 3 levels of sustainability. In a sense, they can be distinguished in terms of the time horizon. One is the short-run sustainable issue, particularly related to financial sustainability. The second issue is, of course, what we are all increasingly focusing on, which is environmental sustainability, particularly related to the climate change impacts. And we've already seen some of the terrible and disastrous implications for us in Pakistan due to the floods. And the third and more long-term sustainable development is the focus provided by the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations, which have a series of goals and targets and indicators and is targeted for achievement by 2030. And in particular focuses on SDG targets for poverty reduction, for unemployment reduction, for youth, for gender, so on and so forth. So there are these three very, very important aspects of sustainable development which this conference is focusing on. An extremely well-designed set of sessions have been put together, and we all look forward to hearing the speakers subsequently. I will today focus on the short-run issues of financial sustainability. And this has acquired a great importance in the global context today after the implications of the Russia-Ukraine war, the disturbance that took place in global supply chains, and the extraordinary exponential increase in commodity prices that we have seen since 21 and now in 22. And this has had all kinds of implications on the current account deficits and balance of payments position of a large number of countries, including Pakistan. And in fact, now we are moving to the other extreme, which is a deep recession with high interest rates, and the global capital markets are becoming tighter and tighter. Perhaps what is very significant is that for many countries, default has come into the horizon as a possible development. And Pakistan itself also finds itself somewhat placed in this position in the not so distant future. A very significant sovereign debt vulnerability ranking has been produced recently by Investors Education, and they have identified as many as 25 countries in the world which are vulnerable to default. And I'm afraid Pakistan has also been included in this list and is placed as high as fourth in this list. Now the point is that some time ago, prior to the recommencement of the IMF program in September, many credit rating agencies, including the big ones like S&P, Fitch, and Moody's, all downgraded Pakistan and transformed us from stable to negative. This is at the if you like, the default. So we have today a B- negative rating. The restoration of the IMF program has unfortunately not yet led to an improvement. Pakistan's foreign exchange reserves have fallen to extremely worrying low level. Prior to the return of the IMF, our reserves were 9.8. Then we got this $1.2 billion from the IMF, but since then, our reserves have continued to fall, and as of the end of September, we are down to close to $8 billion. This is adequate only to provide import cover for 1.2, 1.3 months. For any country, the safe level of import cover, as you know, is at least 3 months of imports. So we really do not, at this point, have a safe import cover. The other indication of the greater international perception of risk of Pakistan is the fact that Pakistani bonds, the euro and the sukuk bonds today carry a much heavier discount than was the case ever before. And this will make it increasingly difficult to float bonds in weeks and months to come. Let me just highlight what the implications of moving closer or perhaps even defaulting are for any country, with 25 countries in the world vulnerable. Believe it or not, this is perhaps the highest incidence ever of the likelihood of default globally. 1/6 of the world's population is in countries which are considered today as vulnerable to default, includes large countries like Brazil, Pakistan, Egypt, Argentina, and so on and so forth. We have seen the experience of countries which have actually experienced default, unfortunately. Sri Lanka is our closest country. The rate of inflation in Sri Lanka has approached over 60%. And the GDP growth rate has, of course, turned negative because of the shortage of imports and essential supplies. So God forbid, we have to be very, very careful about ensuring that such a situation does not arise in our country. Why has Pakistan been included in this list of countries considered as vulnerable to default? This is a very important question. Today, Pakistan's total external debt, both to the public and private sectors, adds up to $130 billion as of the end of 2021-22. This is equivalent to 40% of the recently rebased GDP. Prior to this rebasing, it was actually significantly higher because the GDP has been raised through rebasing by about 16%. Prior to the rebasing, the ratio was close to 46%. Now, of course, if you look at the other countries, Pakistan appears to be relatively better placed in terms of the burden of external debt. Our ratio is 40, as I just said, 40%. Brazil, as high as 80%. Sri Lanka, 71%. Argentina, 67%. And Turkey, which is considered as a marginally in default, 61%. So fortunately, in this indicator, Pakistan appears to be in a significantly better position. But then the other measure which is used to evaluate vulnerability is the ratio of foreign exchange reserves to the external debt. Here, I'm afraid we do not do too well. Currently with reserves at close to $8 billion, with debt close to $130 billion, we are actually below 7%, whereas other countries like Argentina are at 9%, Brazil at 24%, Turkey at 18%. Of course, Sri Lanka is very low at only 3%. But in this particular indicator, Pakistan seems to be a relatively perilous and difficult position. The problem with our country has been that external debt has doubled in only 7 years after 2014-15. And this is, of course, primarily because we have been carrying periodically in different years like 2017-18, last year, and so on, extremely high current account deficits which have to be financed. And when you finance them, you borrow more, and when you borrow more, your debt goes up. Believe it or not, over the last 7 years, our total current account deficit cumulatively is $75 billion. And if you take this on an annual average as a percentage of the GDP, It's anywhere between 3.2 to 3.6% of the GDP, which is high in Pakistan's case by historical standards. Of course, it reached a peak of 6.4% in 2017-18, and last year hit a $17 billion of current account deficit, and with the ratio at 4.6% of the GDP. So whenever the current deficit rises disproportionately, inevitably the country has to borrow because you do not have reserves adequate to finance it, and the end result is that the external debt goes up, and subsequently your external financing requirements go up further because of the rise in the external debt repayment liabilities. So today the position for Pakistan is that in 2014-15, Pakistan's external debt to GDP ratio was only 24%. And in the period of 7 years, it has gone up to 40, in fact, it would have been 46% if we had taken the original GDP estimates. Interestingly, at that time in 2014-15, we were not very far from the safe level of this ratio, which you see in countries like India and perhaps Bangladesh, although Bangladesh is also beginning to get worried and has sought an IMF program. India's GDP ratio is, I'm sorry. India's ratio is also close to 20%. Now, the problem has been compounded further by the fact that the doubling of the external debt in the last 7 years has been accompanied by actual tripling of the external debt repayment liability annually. And it has gone up from $4 billion in 2014-15 to $12 billion currently. Why has this happened? This is the consequence of a change fundamentally in the composition of the external debt of Pakistan. Historically, Pakistan was a country which essentially went to multilateral agencies like the World Bank, Asian Development Bank, so on, who provided project and program assistance on a long-term basis, essentially with concessional interest rates. Increasingly, when our current account deficits reach particularly high levels like in 2017-18, we had to go and find lenders in the commercial banks internationally, particularly Chinese and other banks like Standard Bank and so on, and also float bonds. Both these are relatively high cost and have a medium-term tenure, and that explains why our external debt servicing or debt repayment liability has gone up 3 times in 7 years. And today, the share of medium-term and relatively short-term debt share has gone up from 24% in 2014-15 to almost 43%. We see a very clear pattern. Whenever Pakistan has had to finance a large account deficit, like in 2017-18, we had a deficit of $19.3 billion, perhaps the highest in our history, and as a result of which the net left a gap of $7.5 billion, and that was inevitably reflected in a quantum decline in our foreign exchange reserves. We have seen a similar thing happen last year. Our current account deficit rose once again because of this commodity price boom following the war between Russia and Ukraine. It jumped up again to a very high level of $17.3 billion, and we were able to only organize external debt plus net in foreign investment of close to $10 billion. And the end result was that our reserves plummeted by something like 7. Now let us look at the projections made by the IMF in its recent staff report following the approval by the Executive Board of the 7th and 8th reviews of Pakistan and the release of $1.2 billion to support the augmentation of our foreign exchange reserves, which are at a very low level. Then comes the IMF's extra funding to Pakistan, which is estimated at about $3.6 billion if we successfully complete the 9th, the 10th, and the 11th review by May 2023. Then Pakistan would receive an additional $3.6 billion. So combined together, these two, Pakistan would be in a position to build its reserves by an extra over $6 billion. And mashallah, we can take our reserves up to close to $16 billion, which is about 2.5 months reserve cover. So the IMF scenario is a positive one. Of course, it is based on assumptions that Pakistan implements all the reforms agreed to. Pakistan meets the performance criteria and indicative targets and the structural benchmarks and is able to proceed systematically and consistently with the targets in the IMF program. And if all this happens, then inshallah, Pakistan by June 2023 would be back again in a position of relatively healthy foreign exchange reserves of $16 billion, close to 2.5 months reserve cover. I'm afraid I've had to develop a somewhat alternative current scenario for this year, 2022-23, which takes account some new factors which have entered the scene. The first is the negative impact of the floods. The floods are now going to create a situation where, very unfortunately, Pakistan's exports could be affected adversely, particularly of textiles and rice. And on the other hand, our imports would have to go up because of the damage to the cotton crop. We would have to import larger quantities of cotton, and possibly, given the next Rabi crop's difficulty in sowing, we may have to import more wheat during the year. And as a result of all this, I have assumed that even after contractionary fiscal monetary policies, we will still probably have now a current account deficit which is about $3 billion higher than anticipated by the IMF. The second point I'd like to make is that IMF thinks that Pakistan, under the umbrella of the IMF program, could seek substantially larger financing from private creditors. The private creditors are, of course, the flotation of bonds and, of course, the borrowing from international commercial banks, particularly Chinese banks. In fact, the IMF assumes that this could more or less double this year in relation to last year, where the need still was high. I am being somewhat more conservative on that front because risk perceptions about Pakistan have gone up. And as I said earlier, flotation of bonds would be especially difficult given the large discounts we are currently facing. I am, however, assuming that official creditors, the World Bank, the Asian Bank, and others, and particularly some bilaterals, including possibly the Paris Club, and of course, needless to say, others, who I will mention shortly, would come through with larger support to Pakistan, particularly for rehabilitation and reconstruction financing after the floods. And therefore, we have assumed here that about $3 billion extra would be forthcoming, partly by switching from regular lines of finance. Overall, my assessment is that the financing gap, if we have a current account deficit of $12 billion, would be in the region of about $3 billion. And if the IMF program continues and we meet the targets and get whatever waivers are necessary, and we are successful in renegotiating the targets and bringing them down to more realistic levels and somewhat softening the reform agenda after the floods, and Pakistan is able to implement successfully over the next 3 reviews, then the $3.6 billion means that Pakistan would end up with a small surplus of $0.6 billion, and realistically speaking, our reserves could cross $10 billion by the end of next year. But this is based on some very fine assumptions, and some of the risk elements I need to highlight. The big question mark to me is one of the largest bilateral sources of support to Pakistan, and I thank China for the extraordinary bilateral support they have given us, not only in terms of CPEC-related projects, but also in terms of large investments in the power sector. And the Chinese international commercial banks have been a significant and large source of funding for Pakistan. The fundamental question is, will China also be willing on a more expanded scale beyond swap funds and so on to give us debt rescheduling and debt relief? This is perhaps the single most important question, because that will also guide and influence the behavior of other bilaterals globally. So we are waiting to see, after the Prime Minister's visit, which is expected to be in November, to China, to see what happens. And as always, let me also tell you that when I was in the hot seat after the bomb in 1998, one of the countries which came to our support fairly quickly was China. And I want to place on record my deep appreciation of the support from China, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and so on at that very difficult time in Pakistan's history. Ladies and gentlemen, the financing needs of Pakistan, unfortunately, will continue to grow, particularly because as we borrow more, our external debt repayment liabilities keep on increasing. As I've said, they've already tripled in the last 7 years. Hopefully, they will not rise as fast, but they will certainly continue to grow. And the IMF's estimates are that there will be an increase each year in 2023, 24, and 24-25 by about $3 billion extra annually in terms of our external financing requirements. Does this mean Pakistan will need to negotiate a 3-year extended fund facility again with the IMF after May 23, when the program, the present one, comes to an end? Ladies and gentlemen, I will quickly and very importantly take you through the top priority policies we need to implement to ensure that our current account deficit remains under control and does not start going out of control as happened last year and sometimes in the past. The key thing is we have to have more export-led growth. Unfortunately, what has been happening is that systematically over the last 5-6 years, the incentives that we have traditionally given to our exporters have generally been gradually withdrawn. The first withdrawal was the zero rating of export sectors. Now domestic sales of export industries have been subjected to full taxation, and we are collecting as much as 50-60 billion rupees from the export sector in sales revenue, tax revenue. This is something which was there till the budget of 2019-20. This is unfortunate. The second thing which happened is that a few weeks ago, under IMF pressure, the subsidized refinancing of exports was withdrawn. That used to create a differential of as much as perhaps 5 or more percentage points, and certainly facilitate liquidity of exporters. And the third, of course, was that Pakistan had maintained a policy of a lower electricity tariff of 9 cents per kilowatt hour for export-oriented industry. This has again been brought into doubt, and NEPRA is currently wavering as to whether it will recommend this or not. So the three main instruments of incentivization of the export sector are in jeopardy. Two have already gone, and one is in jeopardy. So the result is export profitability is increasingly suspect. And when you allow for the fact that Pakistan could see quantum increases in gas prices, in electricity tariffs, and of course, we have already seen the quantum jump in transport costs, we are beginning to see substantial cost push inflation, which will be reflected in the loss of competitiveness of our exports at a time when the global environment is getting increasingly tighter due to the looming global recession. So my plea is we should try and convince the policy makers as well as the fund that Pakistan has to increase profitability of exporters. Exchange rate beyond a point doesn't help because the textile sector in particular is dependent on a large amount of foreign inputs, like, of course, machinery, like art silk and rayon, and now, of course, cotton. So if you use the exchange rate, half almost of that effect is lost due to higher cost of inputs. So we have to find a different way of promoting profitability in the export sector. The second is the strong deterrence of imports. Last year, imports broke an all-time record and reached, believe it or not, the level of 21% of GDP. I remember in our time when we used to be in government over 2 decades ago, it used to be about 11 to 12% of GDP. Imports have had an unbelievable exponential growth in Pakistan, particularly in years when we kept the real effective exchange rate very high, like in the middle part of the last decade. The end result is that our imports have grown outrageously. And one of the big reasons for that extraordinary growth also has been the fact that Pakistan has perhaps over-liberalized its import regime. And what do we mean by that? There was a time in the mid-90s when we were helping in the government policy making, both internally and externally. Pakistan's average incidence of import duty on the value of imports used to be 21%. Today, it is down to 7%. The other, perhaps something which very few people have realized, is that we have over-liberalized more than India and Bangladesh, both of whom have a substantially larger export base. What is the evidence for this? According to the world tariff profiles of the WTO, the average MFN tariff in Pakistan is 11%. It is 14% in Bangladesh, and believe it or not, 18% in India. And what is even more striking is that India has given enormously higher protection to agricultural sector. There were years when India was not surplus yet in cotton. The import duty on cotton used to be anywhere like 40 to 50% by India. Believe it or not, you'll be surprised perhaps to know that the import duty on cotton in Pakistan today is 0%. No protection whatsoever to a cotton grower. No wonder we have seen an unfortunate switch in cropping patterns away from cotton to sugarcane and other products. We have to bring that back. My recommendation is that there has to be a system-wide escalation in import tariffs to provide more protection and to encourage what we call made in Pakistan. Made in Pakistan. So I'm recommending the following. Generalized import reform. We have currently 4 slabs, 3, 11, 16, and 20, we moved to 5, 15, 25, and 35. And we add an import handling charge of 1 to 2%. This should help us. And finally, my recommendation would be that at this time when global interest rates are going up, the time has come to raise the return further on Russian digital accounts and on foreign currency accounts by up to 2 percentage points. This is necessary if the money is to stay with us. Ladies and gentlemen, let me conclude by saying that we all are worried. This is our beloved country. We do not want to even consider for a moment the possibility of difficulty or inability to honor our external payment obligations. We owe it to our political and leadership and institutional capacity that we have to ensure that whatever may happen, Pakistan emerges in the next few years as a country which has not only been able to successfully avoid its default, but inshallah, I pray will show sustainable growth and inclusive development once again. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for your hearing my plea. Thank you.
This was very informative and thought-provoking. Dear audience, today in the inaugural session of the conference, we have instituted Fatma Jinnah lecture to honor Madre Millat Mohtarama Fatma Jinnah. Our university, being Pioneer Women University in Pakistan, is named after her to pay her tribute for her contribution and services for Pakistan. It is my absolute privilege to introduce you to Dr. Ishrat Hussain, our guest of honor, to deliver the Fatma Jinnah lecture. Central banker, economist, educator, author, advisor. These are just a few of the roles Dr. Ishrat Hussain has held in his illustrious career. A former governor of the State Bank of Pakistan, Dr. Hussain has maintained an active scholarly interest in development issues. He has authored 24 books and monographs, 34 book chapters, and more than 40 articles in refereed journals. Some of his widely read books include Pakistan, the Economy of the Elitist State, CPEC and Pakistani Economy, and Governing the Ungovernable. Until recently, Dr. Hussain has served as advisor for institutional reforms and austerity of Pakistan. Dr. Hussain had a distinguished career at the World Bank spanning over 2 decades. Some of his key positions at the bank were resident representative to Nigeria, head of the bank's Debt and International Finance Division, chief economist for Africa, chief economist for East Asia and the Pacific region, including China. He was appointed the governor of Pakistan Central Bank in December 1999. During the next 6 years, he implemented a major program of restructuring of the central bank and steered the reforms of the banking sector. In recognition of his meritorious services, he was conferred the prestigious award of Hilal-e-Imtiaz in 2003 and highest civil award of Nishan-e-Imtiaz in 2016. The Banker magazine of London declared him as the Central Bank Governor of the Year for Asia in 2005. He received the Asian Banker Lifetime Achievement Award in 2006, and the list is continuous. Let us give a warm welcome to Dr. Ishrat Hussain.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Mohtarama Vice Chancellor, Dr. Bushra Yasmeen, faculty members, distinguished guests, and my dear students. First of all, let me thank the organizers of this conference for providing me this opportunity to share my thoughts with this audience. I want to also commend the FJWU Economics Department for organizing the second international conference with such a galaxy of speakers, both from Pakistan and outside Pakistan. I have the privilege today to deliver the lecture in memory of one of the greatest freedom fighters who stood by her own brother in the achievement of this country. So I want to pay a particular tribute to her. My topic today is towards a new paradigm for future development pathway. And because I have come to the conclusion from my long experience with development that economics does not provide all the answers for sustained and sustainable development. We have to have a multidisciplinary approach in which political science, law, management, sciences, and many other subjects impinge upon the final outcomes. So we have to deviate from an undue emphasis on one single discipline. The world is becoming very complex, and single discipline is not going to answer all our difficult questions. Because this is the younger audience, and some of you are not economists, I would like to take you back to a history of development thinking which has reached this particular point of time. Unfortunately, when I was a graduate student, we used to be taught history of economic thought. But now I see the curriculums of most of the economics departments have skipped this very useful point of reflection for all of us. Since the late 1940s, when the developing countries started gaining independence, development literature was dominated by pessimists who believed that these countries, that means the emerging developing countries, were condemned to live in poverty, hunger, and illiteracy. Prebisch-Singer hypothesis advanced the proposition that the developing countries produce agricultural commodities whose demand by advanced countries would remain limited, while they have to rely upon the advanced countries for imports of industrial products. Therefore, the primary commodity exporters, like developing countries, would continue to face a secular decline in terms of trade due to a combination of low income and price elasticities of demand. This decline would transfer income from poor to rich countries, and thus contact with the international economy was detrimental to the welfare of the developing world and would retard growth, keeping these countries entrapped in poverty. These economists proposed that the only way to avert this tendency was to protect domestic manufacturing industries by pursuing import substitution strategy. India under Nehru took the lead and adopted a centrally planned command and control economy dominated by the public sector and an inward-looking industrialization behind high tariff walls. Other countries followed the Indian example. The Cold War between the Soviet Union and the US also brought to fore the two alternate economic models, that is the centrally planned allocations and market-based allocations of resources. As the Soviet economy was growing relatively rapidly at that time, newly independent countries wanted to shun the capitalist model which they associated with colonialism and neocolonialism. The theoretical insights provided by Nerks, Singer, and Prebisch guided the leaders of these countries, and unfortunately, over the next quarter of a century, the evidence is that import substitution strategy actually hurt the developing countries from growth and from getting out of poverty. This objective having been challenged by a new body of research which was based on country case studies and the successful experience of Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Singapore, followed by Malaysia, Thailand, Indonesia, Brazil, and then China, demonstrated that access to the markets in advanced countries actually had resulted in higher export earnings of developing world that augmented their foreign exchange and increased both the quantum as well as the utilization of domestic human and capital resources. The spectacular growth rates recorded by these countries could not have been possible if they had relied upon the domestic market alone. The most populous country in the world, that is China, with a domestic market twice the size of the US and Europe combined, also relied upon the world markets to grow at an accelerated pace, doubling its per capita income every 10 years, and lifted 700 million people out of poverty, an unprecedented record in the human history. The hollowing out of the Soviet Union and Soviet economy, followed by the disintegration, itself gave impetus to the trend of deregulation, privatization, and liberalization. Once again, it was India, the second most populous country, faced with a severe balance of payment crisis in 1991, which dismantled its license Raj and integrated its economy into the global economy and invited foreign capital to invest. China by now had accumulated a solid record of doubling its per capita incomes in 7 years' time. With East Asian countries already making sustained progress, the proponents of globalization got an upper hand. The impact of globalization transmitted through trade in goods and services, capital flows, working ideas, and people and technology have been, by and large, beneficial for the developing countries on an aggregate basis in fostering growth and alleviating poverty, reducing unemployment, and improving social indicators. Most emerging and developing countries made great strides in the period between 1990 to 2010 until the global financial crisis unraveled. As chronicled by Stephen Reddell in his recent book, The Great Surge, while Pakistan has fallen behind, India, Bangladesh, Vietnam have made significant progress in the same period. Since 1995, real GDP of emerging and developing countries, which I call EDCs, has grown by 7.7% on average annually, and per capita incomes have increased by more than 70% between 1995 to 2013. On population-weighted basis, excluding China, the increase is about 90%. Consequently, the relative share of EDCs in the global GDP at purchasing power parity has increased to 57%. That means the developing countries are now producing more than all the advanced countries of the world. The number of poor living at $1.90 per day has halved from 2 billion in 1990 to 897 million by 2012, bringing down the share of poor people in the total population from 37 to 13% in that year. The number of people living in low human development fell from 3 billion in 1990 to just slightly more than 1 billion in 2014. The share of EDCs in the world exports rose from 21 to 41% in this period. International capital flows jumped from 91 billion to 1145 billion. All social indicators such as life expectancy, maternal mortality, infant mortality, adult literacy, net enrollment ratios, and average years of schooling have shown significant improvements. In Pakistan, there is a group of economists and commentators who felt that Pakistan has suffered because of globalization and liberalization. Evidence point out that this hypothesis has no empirical validity, as other countries in the neighborhood with the same policies who were lagging behind Pakistan have taken advantage of the dynamic global economy in the same period to bring improvements in the living standards of the majority of their population. The last decade has been marked, unfortunately, by the weakenings of the drivers of globalization after the global financial crisis. I won't go on all the factors. There's a longer paper which is available for everyone. But I would like to submit to you that there were 6 or 7 factors which have weakened the forces of globalization in the last decade. One is the demographic transition. The rich countries are aging, and therefore they need more migrants from the developing countries which have youthful population. But there is a whole resentment against migration in the US and Europe, and that is weakening one of the transmission mechanisms, which is the demographic transition. Second is the shift in economic power. The US is no longer a hegemony over the world economy. It is China which has emerged as the main contender for #1 position in the world economy. And this has led to tension between the US and China. The third is the speed of technology dissemination and absorption. You know, internet, software application, connectivity, networks, high-speed mobile phones, e-commerce, cloud computing, data analytics, they have spread throughout the developing countries. Still, the digital divide is quite severe, as many countries lag in these critical areas. The fourth factor is information explosion. Human knowledge gets obsolescent like the machinery after a few years because there's exponential growth in the knowledge. And this is knowledge economy, century of knowledge economy, not industrial or agricultural economy. But countries which do not have the capacity to generate, disseminate, absorb, and apply that knowledge, and those who do not indulge in lifelong learning and they think they have got the degrees and that's the end of the story, they are going to suffer in this globalized, in this integrated world. And that is one of the areas where the EDCs are lagging behind. And the most important is the climate change risk. And you have seen the evidence of 33 million people in Pakistan being affected by the floods. 6 times more rainfall than average rainfall in Sindh and Balochistan. And this is now a fact of life. And we have to confront with this, and therefore the need for a new development paradigm. And finally, the other factor which is weakening the global impulses is the financial integration. You have a situation where the Western central banks, the monetary tightening, the hike in policy rates are leading to capital flows away from developing countries to the United States. And that means that the access to these international capital flows is no longer going to be at the same level as it was in the last 3 decades. So these are the areas where I see that the story, the positive story of 1990 to 2010 is coming to an end. Now, if that is the case, then what is it that we should be doing, both as a development thinkers, but also as people who are struggling to find the right mix of policies for the betterment of our own countries? Let me submit that global warming is no longer something that we anticipate at some distant date in future. It has already made a stronger foothold and is damaging lives and property of millions of people, not only in Pakistan, but in other places, through extreme weather events. One of the assumptions of the globalization was that dismantling of barriers and disappearance of borders would spread its benefit to the majority of the people. But today, the nationalism and protection tendencies have gained ascendancy in the Western countries. The tables have turned. It was President Xi Jinping who made a very forceful defense of globalization at his speech in the World Economic Forum, while the traditional champion of trade and financial liberalization, the US, was absent from this table. So you can see what President Trump was doing, make America great again, MAGA, which means that they would have a huge tariffs against the Chinese goods, which really benefited the US economy. So that high tariffs and penalty against the Chinese is something which is going to make us rethink about the role of the international trade flows. Now, what are the mega trends which I feel would inform us for the next 10 to 20 years? I believe that there would be more protectionist tendencies, there will be less migration, there will be more impact of the climate change, and therefore the global value chains, the intra-industry linkages, which were boosting the economies of the developing countries, will no longer be, as prevalent as they were. And the composition of the labor forces, even those who are migrating to developed countries like Japan, has allowed for the first time migration, is for skilled and semi-skilled labor force, not the unskilled, which has been actually the majority in case of Pakistan. Now, in light of these weakening forces and the new trends and the future risks, I would submit to you, ladies and gentlemen, that there are three major issues that should make us rethink the efficacy and usefulness of the present development paradigm. Although there are many, and some of you may have a difference of opinion about these, but to me, these three challenges are growing income inequalities, technological disruption, and climate risks. A biting indictment against the globalization is the rising income inequality within countries. Now, we are all very fond of praising China and India, which are the two fastest growing economies, and we should do that. But in 2000, in India, the richest 10% had only 40% of the national income, but by 2018, 18 years later, their share has jumped to 52%. So 10% of the population has more than 50% of the income. while that of the bottom 50% has declined from 20% to 18% in the same period. And the middle class, which is growing in these countries, has suffered even a bigger loss from 40% to 30%. These are stark inequalities which are also a threat to social cohesion. In India, you have a divide between the North India, which is all poor, and the South India, which is thriving and really is the same level as the East Asian countries. In China, the richest 10% of the population owns 70% of the total household wealth. And top 1% of the population, just 1% of the population, owns now 31% of the wealth, up from 21% 20 years ago. And as economists know, we measure this by Gini coefficient, and Gini coefficient has risen from 0.29 in 1978 to 0.47 in 2020. Very close to what it is in the United States. So the economy of the United States and China looks similar as far as the concentration of wealth is concerned. And that is something we have to worry about. So what should we do in Pakistan? I'll take these issues and try to see how we can address them in case of Pakistan, because my whole emphasis is how this new thinking should try to resolve some of our difficulties. And I'm taking a medium and long term. I'm not really very much enamored of the short term, because the short term everybody knows, and you are all very much expert on the short term. There are 6 or 5 introduced progressive taxation and pro-poor public expenditures. I'm a great believer, and there is a lot of evidence worldwide that greater participation of the females in the labor force is not only a driver of growth, but also reduces income and gender disparities. And Pakistan is at the bottom as far as the global gender gap index is concerned. So we have to devote a lot of attention. And this is not only the fact that we have higher education of our females, but there are social norms, the family pressures, which are not allowing our females, very capable, very highly competent ladies, to participate in the labor force and contribute to the economic development. And this is something, if we do not reverse, we are going to face greater problems in the future. The third one is that we have to give special attention to less advanced areas. Balochistan, rural Sindh, southern Punjab, merged areas of KP, southern KP, GB, AJK. These are no longer as well-to-do as Islamabad, Karachi, Lahore. We have to get attention away from these 3 big centers to the less advanced areas of Pakistan. The fourth, that vocational and technical training is what makes you skilled or semi-skilled. And that is the demand in the advanced countries, and that is where our youth can actually find gainful employment, not only in the country, but outside. And finally, we should have robust social safety nets. We still have 25% of the population living below the poverty line. For their consumption needs, the state has the responsibility to provide them the basic social safety needs. Now I come to the second point, which is technology. Technology is a tool. IT is a tool in order to enhance the efficiency and the productivity of your agriculture, education, health, finance, and other sectors. And the three countries which are leading this are US, China, and India. As you know, India now is one of the biggest exporter of the services sector because they have trained their human resources in order to become proficient in technological advances. And they are in heavy demand, not only in their own country, but in other countries. So the young men and women have to deviate from generalized education to more specialized education, particularly where their skill set is commensurate with the demand for the global economy. So we have used all our mobile phones. And I don't blame you because the young men are very conversant and very familiar. But what have we used the 4Gs and the 3Gs? We have used them for messaging, for texting, for streaming, for vlogging, for gaming, for social media. But we haven't used them to apply to solve the problems in agriculture or health or education. And look what is happening to our agriculture. We have a stagnation in our agriculture productivity. But today we have drones and sensors which can actually provide information about what the soil conditions are, what the pest conditions are, and they can actually pinpoint as to what dosage should be given at that. Have we used that? If we use that, that is going to make a huge difference as far as the agriculture productivity is concerned. Now we have to stabilize, we have to expand our optic fiber network, we have to fiberize our towers, and we have to reduce excess taxation on telecom sector and spectrum pricing. Unless we do that, I don't think we will be able to use the technologies for the breaker and the better use of our problems. The other problem we have is very pertinent to you. Pakistan needs 100,000 IT graduates every year from Pakistan's universities in order to meet the demand. One of the reasons, when I talked to some of the Pakistanis in Silicon Valley, they said, we don't find the talent. Only 25,000 are being produced every year. And out of those 25,000, only 5 to 10,000 are employable. India produces millions of IT graduates every year. Now, we can't produce 100,000 as compared to what they are doing. This is one of the limiting factors. So those who really want to excel in life in the future, because there's no career anymore, it is all employability. And the employability comes in when you use those skills and those tools which enable you to solve the problems. It's no longer degree, it's not longer your grades which count. I've seen 4.0 GPA graduates from IBA, they couldn't survive. But I found a lot of those who were very creative, who were very innovative, who were thinking out of the box, and they have now risen. They have set up their own companies, and some of them have become millionaires. So it is not your degree, and I used to laugh when the students used to change the teachers. कि सर हमारा 3.5 है, इसको बढ़ा के आप 3.6 कर देंगे तो हमारे ये हो जाएगा. I mean, this is complete nonsense. It is what you retain up here and what you apply that is really going to help you as far as your future is concerned. So what do we do for digital Pakistan? Increased access and connectivity, increase the digital skills and talent and literacy, increase the digital infrastructure, introduce e-government so there is no papers and no files being chased by the government, and encourage innovation and entrepreneurship. That is the name of the game. So if you do that, then Pakistan would once again be on the map as far as the technological advance is concerned. Do you know that by 2030, India has kept its target of software as service to $1 trillion. That is what their ambition is. That is what their sights are. And there are thousands such companies already, and more than 100 of these companies are unicorns. What are unicorns? That their value is more than $1 billion. Unfortunately, Pakistan has none. So we never are going to take advantage of this technological revolution unless we do those kind of policy actions and governance improvements which I have described. Finally, I will come to the climate change risks. I have already described what a havoc and what a devastation the recent floods have brought in. But it's not only confined to Pakistan. Look at what was the unprecedented heat in Australia, the record rainfall in Brazil, severe droughts in Brazil, Argentina and Africa, record temperatures in Europe, and heat wave in China. This is a clear evidence that climate change is nothing which we should wait for the future. It is really hurting us today. And if we don't use our energies and our ingenuity and our policies in order to tackle these risks, we are going to be in deep trouble as far as our sustainable development is concerned. You do know that 1/3 of Himalayan glaciers would melt by the end of this century. 1/3 of Himalayan glaciers. Pakistan would have a population of 350 million people by 2050. So when you have glacier melting, then your river, whole Indus, will have less water available for cultivation, for energy purposes, for hydro energy, and also for your food security. So you have energy security, water security, and your whole agriculture production is going to decline while your population is increasing from 220 million to 350 billion. That is the scenario we have to tackle. And it has to start from today. We just cannot say, oh, we won't be there, so somebody, oh, but you will be there. So you have to think hard as to how we can use these. The population's overall demand would expand by 50%. And that means that 56% more crop calories have to be grown compared to what was being produced in 2010. But the scenario I just sketched is that less water availability, less energy availability, and less food availability would not be able to meet the demands of this growing population. Other is urbanization. I used to travel on the GT road from Lahore to Rawalpindi. And I didn't find, except for a Kamoki, Gujranwala, Belt, Kalasha, Kaku, there were not many human settlements and habitations. Now I go to not only to Pindi, but to Faisalabad, to Sheikhupura Road. There's a whole jungle of human settlements, and new housing societies are coming in, taking the place of the farmland. So once you have climate risks, which are reducing the availability of your critical inputs, while your land, which is fixed in quantum, is being encroached upon by the urban and semi-urban and peri-urban settlements. This scenario is something you have to make very clear, analysis and take action. So what should we do for this? I have, again, 5-point agenda, which is research and development for drought and pest-resistant varieties of crops. So we do not have to grow sugarcane, we don't have to grow rice, but we have to switch to other types of food grains which require less water and which are resistant to drought. Second, we are wasting almost 50% of our very scarce water resources through inefficiency and inequitable distributions. I have witnessed at the module, at the irrigation distribution channels, the influential people have tampered with the modules and over-flooded their lands. While at the tail end, the poor farmers don't have water because it has all been consumed at the upper end. Now that's 50% of your water being wasted, or it's going into the sea because it's not being utilized. So you have to conserve and you have to make efficient use of your water resources. Third, we cannot rely on oil and gas for our energy needs. We have to switch to renewable energy, and that is wind and solar. And a lot of people are doing today on their own houses, but I think this has to be done on a nationwide basis. The fourth is that we have been deforesting our forest lands. We have to renew, regenerate, and add to our forestation cover and our watershed management. Because if you do the watershed management, you don't have the silting of the rivers and the canals, and that can help you. And finally, we don't have all the resources, and we haven't made use of the Green Climate Fund, which is for this purpose, to develop the resilient climate ecologically sustainable infrastructure. India has done, Bangladesh has done, but we haven't made use of these funds which are available for making this transformation. So let me conclude, because my time is up. So from the above discussion which I've shared with you, it emerges that in designing our development policies, programs and projects, these three cross-cutting themes, inequality, technology, and climate change, have to be mainstreamed and not taken as separate, standalone sectoral issues, which is the case today. All sectors, agriculture, water, education, health, and all policies, fiscal, monetary, trade, would need to incorporate measures that would maximize the benefits and minimize the risks arising from these themes. This is by no means, I can assure you, having worked with many governments in Pakistan, a straightforward or easy exercise. And many difficult trade-offs are involved with huge political costs. Can you imagine any political party in power which says we have to slow down our growth because we have to secure our future. I can't imagine that because this is going to cost them votes. The other problem is that we have a diminution of our capacity. I started my career as a civil servant, and I can assure you that if I have a meter which says the efficiency of the civil service in 1960s and 70s and 80s was 8 on a scale of 10, that index will now show 3 or 4. So our capacity to implement the policies and the programs and the project has actually diminished, and we have to come up with the new institutional arrangements whereby our capacity is not only enhanced but also new ways of looking at things. Coordination between the federal, the provincial governments, the private sector, the academia, and the NGOs and the international donor community. That is the new name of the game. All of us will have to work together in a collaborative manner. Today we are all turf fighting. We want to do things which we feel belong to us. We don't want to collaborate and cooperate with anyone else. So having a separate Ministry of Climate Change or environmental protection agencies at the provincial levels, in my view, are outdated concepts. In appraising programs, projects, and allocating resources, the likely impact of these three themes have to be a dominant determining factor. The business as usual, turf protection and fighting, and silo mindset have to be abandoned. These are highly knotty issues to be resolved and require innovative thinking, resolute determination, expeditious execution capability, and strong political foresight. Ladies and gentlemen, the journey has to begin now and not later. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir, for your valuable thoughts and enlightening words. I now request Professor Dr. Azra Yasmeen to present souvenir to Dr. Ishrat Hussain. Professor Dr. Bushra Yasmeen is also requested to join.
मेरी तरफ से डन है।